In this video, I would like to talk about this slightly unusual book I have here. So the book is the selected short stories of Sherwood Anderson, and this is actually the Armed Services edition of the book. So, it says here, Overseas Edition for the Armed Forces, distributed by the Special Services Division, ASF, for the Army, and by the Bureau of Naval Personnel for the Navy. US government property not for sale. Oh dear. I must admit I bought this. Published by Editions for the Armed Services Incorporated, a non-profit organisation established by the Council on Books in Wartime. So I bought this for about 90p on eBay, which is crazy to me, because I think this is both an interesting piece of history, an interestingly bound and shaped and published book, and also a collection of really good short stories. Sherwood Anderson, for those of you who don't know, is an American writer, and his most famous book was a book called Winesburg, Ohio, which is about a small town in America. It's made up, it's not real, and the lives of the people living in that small town, typically quite lonely lives, people who are often trying to better themselves and who fail to do that. It's a really good book about small town life and how that's something that is difficult to escape, and you kind of never do. And he really captured that. And I think it was written I know it was written in the early 20th century, but I don't know exactly when, maybe in the 1920s. So what is the Armed Services Edition? Well, this was a book that was given to members of the armed forces in America to take with them when they went to war as a piece of entertainment. That was its sole purpose, just to keep morale up, to give them something to read, something that was good, something that had been selected and considered. And there were many different editions. They weren't just Sherwood Anderson, there were all sorts of authors. I really now am regretting not having done more research, because this is all off the top of my head from knowledge that I previously had, but I can't tell you what the other authors were. But I want to say Hemingway, just because I feel that suits the crowd, if you like, but I can't remember. But Sherwood Anderson was one, and there were many, many more. And yes, this would get thrown in a backpack by a soldier, and they probably took this to Europe with them, or they would have done. And I just think that's fascinating, that this book once belonged to some soldier in the US Army, and he fought in a war with this. Presumably he fought during the Second World War with this, and this would be the thing that he would turn to escape that war, which is quite interesting, because actually Sherwood Anderson is not really so much of an escapist writer. He's quite a realist. It's about yes, it's not exactly escapism, but anyway, you get the point. I just think the history of it is fascinating, and the journey that this book must have been through. I wish I could see it. I wish I could see where it's been and meet the the soldier that this once belonged to. Just incredible. So, once again, I've managed to waffle away without doing an awful lot of anything. So let's open the book, have a look inside, get a better idea what's going on. So, I think on this side here, it's pretty much repeating what was said on the front there. I think it's pretty much the same thing. It's intended for exclusive distribution to members of the American Armed Forces and is not to be resold, we've been over that, or just not to be made available to civilians. Isn't that fascinating? Look, someone, so they actually, this was originally at some point sold for £1. Don't know why that makes me sad. Surely this is worth more than £1. Certainly was worth more than the 90p I made for it, so this was sold at a loss. Supplied to the members of the armed forces in small, convenient and economical form. New titles will be issued regularly, and indeed they were. There we are, a list of the current group we found on the inside back cover. Maybe we can see what those inside back cover, let's see if we can find those without damaging the book. It's very, very frail, as you can imagine. So, here we go. Oh, someone scribbled on there, that's disappointing. I could rub that out, it seems to just be pencil. So, anyone here that I know? Not really. I don't know a lot of these names. That's embarrassing. Plays with Eugene O'Neill. That's an unusual one. Wouldn't expect that. Henry Adams. Education of Henry Adams. So really only one or two that are immediately obvious to me. Interesting, some interesting titles as well. Saltwater Daffy. The House of Cobwebs. I'd certainly like to read that just based on the title alone. Anyway, let's go back to the front of the book and see what it was saying there, because we didn't really look at that. So we have that's what I was looking for, the publishing date. So this was published. No, that's the copyright of the stories. When was this actually published though? See here. No. Maybe these were published in 1945. I'm not sure though, because that's Eleanor Anderson, so she must have had the rights to Sherwood Anderson's writing after he died, because I do believe he died of a heart attack maybe in the 40s. So maybe she gave the rights, approved the rights. 1945, and maybe that's when this was published. I'm not missing a page, no. Certainly could have been. Oh no, look at that, that's sad. It's falling. See how that just crumbled in my hands. Ah well, not much that can be done. I'm a little confused because I don't quite know when this was originally published. That's slightly annoying. And what I will do here is read the introduction so that you can all get a better idea of who Sherwood Anderson was. Oh yes, and you'll notice that it's all printed like this. It's strange. I suppose you could fit more in, rather than having a tiny book that was tall. I don't know. Introduction. So this will give you a better idea of the author and whether or not he's someone that you might like to read yourself. Sherwood Anderson was born in the fall of 1876 in Camden, Ohio, of parents who were poor and hard-working. His mother was silent, but his father was a man known for his tall stories. The family moved aimlessly about the state, their number increasing with each new town, their finances dwindling, their stays short. Most of Anderson's boyhood was spent in Clyde, Ohio. He had little schooling, since he frequently took odd jobs, and little formal education after 14 when his mother died. So it's really interesting already, quite an impoverished background. His mother was this quiet woman, she's described as silent. I wonder if that's a product of its time. I think perhaps she wasn't willingly silent, and it's interesting that they are not really giving her much space here. After serving in Cuba during the Spanish-American War, he became manager of a paint factory in Elyria, Ohio. I'm not from America. I've only visited a few times, so I'm really sorry if I get the pronunciation of these names wrong. One day, sitting at his desk, he put down his pen and began to think of his past and what it had meant to him, of the future and what it could mean to him. Suddenly he stood up, snatched his hat from the rack, and walked out. He had gone, never to return. He had discovered himself. He had decided to write. So this is one of the reasons that Sherwood Anderson's one of my favourite writers, because he worked for a lot of his life. He was never destined to be a writer, per se, and he was just in his office doing a standard office job and decided, I don't like this anymore, I'm just going to walk out. And that's I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but the story goes that because this story comes up time and time again when I'm reading about Anderson. The story is that he was at work, and then one day he wasn't. He just walked out the door and left with nothing but the shirt on his back and the pen in his pocket. And I love stories like that. I love stories like that because don't we all want to do that? Don't we all sort of wish we had the courage to do that, or the conviction, the belief in ourselves that, yeah, actually I've got something important to offer the world. I think that's just fascinating and quite inspiring in a way. Anyway, moving on. He did not, however, immediately devote all his energy to writing. He was still the bewildered man who had been forced to think. In Chicago, living with his brother Carl, later a well-known painter, he became an advertising copywriter. Publishers were secured for his first books with great difficulty, chiefly through the efforts of the Chicago group, which included Theodore Dreiser, Floyd Dell, and Carl Sandburg. These were the writers who recognized the individuality of... Sorry, I've got to go slowly. His particular genius, its gloom and rebellion, as well as its softness and sentiment. In 1921, Anderson went to Europe for a year. On his return, he made New York and New Orleans his stopping places. He moved to Marion, VA. In 1924, a small town which supported two newspapers, one Republican, the other Democratic, he became the editor of both. He had a stone and log house and a separate cabin near Marion. The cabin was built on a hill and served him as a study. The beauty of the scenery distracted him. The pen grew slack in his hand. The words grew cold on the page. The cabin had to be moved down to a creek where his window was darkened by trees and where there was no view. Anderson remained in Marion, writing in his cabin until shortly before his death. In 1941, he set out on a trip for South America and died suddenly at Cristobal, Colon. At the time, he had been writing his reminiscences. Probably the best of his tales are those like The Triumph of the Egg, which is a strange name, right? I Want to Know Why, and the poignant I'm a Fool, which can be found in collections of the best American writing of the period. The most characteristic stories are those that tell of Anderson's youth, of the people who were at odds with the towns he lived in, and of the few who were a part of them. Wing Biddlebaum and his misunderstood hands, Hal Winters and the lie he never told, Elizabeth and her son, and the embarrassed silence which stretched between them. Surely he's drawing on his own relationship with his silent mother. His sympathies were with the misunderstood, the misfits, the odd people, those headed by circumstance towards an uncertain fate. Certainly this is the kind of, I like people like that. Let's read that line again, because that was a great line. His sympathies were with the misunderstood, the misfits, the odd people, those headed by circumstance towards an uncertain fate. Oh. Yeah, he's my guy. I'm right there with the misfits and the weirdos and the quiet ones as well. Certainly he did not write of an escape from reality. There we go back to what I was saying before, but of reality itself, and of those human feelings, simple and difficult, which have their place there. Well, if you're not intrigued to read one of his stories after reading that, then you are a very different person to me, and that's great and fine. But I really encourage you to read his story, and in fact, Hans is a good one to start with. Really, really good one to start with. I won't read it on this video because we're already at 20 minutes, and I think Hans will take a good half an hour to read through. But I will say, if you are at all interested in me reading this, it would be a delight to do that. So let me know. If not, do read it yourself. Read it before bed. If you can't fall asleep, bring it up online. These are all out of copyright now, so they're available for free online. And just give it a go. I promise there'll be something in Hans that you will be able to relate to. He was a wonderful writer and sounded like a wonderful, if confused and slightly adrift, man. I think he's fantastic, and I think this is a fantastic and wonderfully curious book. Anyway, this has been slightly longer than it should be, so I'll go now, but hopefully I'll get some more videos out soon again. I am sorry that they are taking a little longer than usual. And one final time, thank you all so much for subscribing and for commenting and just being a really inclusive, kind, friendly community of people. As I say, I don't deserve it, but it's wonderful. And I'll see you in the next video.